Hello, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Hello, good morning, sir. I can hear you.
Good morning, we can hear you.
Fantastic.
Good morning, we can hear you.
Good morning, everyone. We are excited and glad to have you all join us. Okay, so we'll start in 1 minute. Thank you for joining in early. Okay, it's 10 a.m. So that's a good place for us to start. Good morning, everyone. Good morning once again. We will go right into it. Today, we are discussing database security and auditing. And like I said earlier, we are pleased to have you guys join us. Now, like we said in the database, used to store data in, you'll agree with me that data, they are like the lifeblood of any enterprise. However, part of the challenges we face today is that this data happens to be the prime target of cybercriminals. And so securing where this data is kept, which is basically our databases from cybercriminals, and preventing direct or deliberate sabotage by administrators becomes crucial to any digital organization. Our session today is broken down into 3 parts, right? Shayi, can you go to the next slide, please? Or let me share my slides. Or go to the next slide. So today's session is divided into 3 parts. We will do a high-level introduction into what databases are. We'll talk about some of the security risks institutions are exposed to. We'll talk about auditable domains in auditing databases. And then we'll have a lab where we'll demonstrate how to go about auditing databases, right? Now, this is an 8-hour session that has been stripped or I'll say compressed into a 1-hour session, because we want to also give or have accommodation to answer questions or concerns that some of us may have. Now, because we have a mixed audience of folks who are either just joining tech or joining the tech risk space, and we also have folks who possibly are industry veterans in IT risk. My appeal will be to the veterans that you be a bit patient as we try to demystify or simplify these domains for the new folks. And then to our new folks, don't be blown away by some of the technicality. Just take notes, ask questions at the end. The videos will be available. The content, the PowerPoint slides, they will be available for us at the end of the session. We will try and we'll make the videos available also on YouTube such that you're able to watch again and again. Our faculties today, for those of us who have been joining our sessions, they are not new faces. One person is Sheyi. He heads the IT audit function in one of the fintechs here in Nigeria. We have Ganiyu, who heads the IT audit function in one of the merchant banks here in Nigeria, and then Ife, who also is into IT auditing, but the security, the cyber security and operations space in one of the tier 1 banks, also here in Nigeria. So let me share my slides, I think.
All right, perfect. Yeah, so hand over to you. Okay. Please go ahead.
Okay. Please confirm you can see my screen.
Yes, yes. But can you blow it up? Just blow it up so it will be full screen. Perfect. So it's perfect now. We're good to go.
So I'll encourage us to take questions at the end of the session. So you just note them down or drop them in the group, in the chat, and I'm sure someone will respond. I'll be taking us through this introduction. Okay. So enterprise database, and or we'll be using that word interchangeably, database management systems and database. So enterprise database and information storage infrastructures, holding what I'll call the crown jewels of an organization, which, like I said earlier, will be our data, right? They are subject to a wide range of abuses and attacks, particularly when they are left vulnerable by either poor system design or configuration. Speaking about attacks, I don't know, there's a report by Accenture, their 2021 State of Cybersecurity Resilience report, that says that security attacks increased by 31% in 2020. It'd be from 2020 to 2021. Now, these security attacks, they are not abating even in 2022. Again, they continue to increase. In Q1 alone this year, some of us would have been aware of the Lapsus gang and some of their exploits. Again, the part of some of the big corporations that have been victims of their activities include the likes of Microsoft, Samsung, Okta, Nvidia, Ubisoft. You know, these are big corporations with very healthy cybersecurity budgets, humbled by teenagers, right? Funny, but not funny. And really, what are they after? They're after data. Data stored where? Stored in databases. Now, if the online stories that we've heard are anything to go by, it was alleged that, for instance, from Microsoft's analysis, the gang basically used social engineering techniques, you know, that were beyond the usual sweet talking or sending an email or tricking an innocent victim into giving them foothold inside the network. But they were alleged to be engaged in outright bribery, right? Offering to pay insiders to provide them with remote access. Now, these insiders, they don't necessarily have to be employees or direct employees of the organization or their intended victim. In today's hugely outsourced IT world, breaking into the computer breaking into the computer of a contractor or service provider who themselves, right, have access to the target is more than enough. I was privileged to audit a company in the UK, and practically all their core IT operations were outsourced. from security operations to network infrastructure to even their databases. So you begin to see that the threat landscape is skewed these days towards even third parties. Now, we are saying all of this just to let us understand the enormity of the challenges before us, even as our institutions continue to digitize to either scale up operations or improve operational efficiency. A mentor of mine said that the real appraisal of our work, and by our work, I mean we tech risk practitioners, they are now being done by attackers, right? And not necessarily organizations or supervisors. Yes, our supervisors, they do their own appraisal, but the quality of our work, right, is largely dependent on, for an institution that has just been hacked, what explanations do you have as somebody in tech risk, right? So there is a lot of responsibility on us. If you look at this, this diagram, you'll see that insider threats, right? Especially when you come to the databases, if you see the arrows from where the attacker is trying to gain access to the data stored in the database, which is basically at the back end, you have your firewall, it tries to make some attempts, you have your IDS and IPS, you have your applications before you even get to, and then you can see the diverse attacks that are impacting the systems just to get hold of that data in the databases, from denial of service to spoofing to port scanning to SQL injection, and then you now have those of privileged insiders. I read an article sometime last month of a database administrator that deleted the organization's database, right? What a database is, we've just talked about this. These are different types of databases. You can always check this up. And then we have DBMS, or database functionalities. Some of them include organizing data. There are different types of databases, from relational database and all that. The basic functionalities of a database is to organize data, store and retrieve data efficiently, manipulate data, either you're updating or you're deleting, enforce referential integrity, back up and recover. And that becomes very critical when we're talking about redundancy, right? Some of the components of the database, today we have even databases that are hosted on the cloud. You have database as a service. So you have data, your hardware for on-prem, software for cloud, network, stored procedures, and database servers. And so as tech risk practitioners, it becomes critically important that we are knowledgeable about the different risks that database management systems are exposed to. We also need to be knowledgeable about the gamut of controls that should be in place to provide that reasonable assurance of the confidentiality, integrity, and availability of the information or data stored on these databases. Now, beyond even protection of data, it's also important that for us tech advisors to make recommendations that enhance operational efficiency of the databases, right? And so it's more important than ever before that we seek knowledge and act on the knowledge in providing this relevant assurance. Again, when it comes to database security, like you will see in the previous slide that I had shared, if you come here, you will see that there are no silver bullets to the protection of your database, meaning that there is no one size fits all, one solution that deals with everything, right? Rather, the focus here is on defense in depth. And while these do not guarantee that your database will not be breached, it will help minimize the likelihood of being breached. It will help reduce your threat landscape. They basically mask you from being a soft target. And so you can see all the controls that have been outlined here before you even get to the database. Okay, now these are some of the threats that databases face. Some, not all. And I'll attempt to speak to some of them from high level. So you have excessive database privileges or privilege abuse, where users may abuse the legitimate access privileges that they have granted to carry out unauthorized activities, right? Or you have excessive privileges, which is basically privileges that maybe you don't need, but because of poor provisioning of that database, you now stumble on certain rights that you don't have. Speaking about privilege abuse, I have said earlier about a DBA, a database administrator, who deleted the organization's data on the database. In fact, that write-up was saying that the staff was disgruntled. Imagine in your institution that your core infrastructure, your DBA, you guys wake up in the morning and the DBA has deleted the company data, right? If you do not have a healthy restore procedure, maybe you guys have not been taking backup and stop, you will see that it sets you back. In fact, even with your backup, it still sets you back. It sets your operations back by a couple of thousands of dollars in trying to restore that. Now, could that have been prevented? The answer is yes. Perhaps in checking the kind of rights that he or she has, ensuring that you have some second level checks, engaging in monitoring, system monitoring, etc. Right? So insider threats, they are real. They are even a lot more difficult to tackle these days. And fortunately, unfortunately, you find out that most institutions focus on the outsiders, right? Ignoring who they have in-house. In that report, in that example that I just gave, the staff was said to be disgruntled, right? And he had been making some suggestions to management, which they were not implementing. There was a project he wanted to run and they were not funding it, right? And that was the basis for him going to go and delete the database, maybe because he saw that it was vulnerable and stuff like that. Now, even though he went to jail, like I said, you can imagine the impact that begins to have on your organization. Then you have lack of security expertise and education. And that's why we're having this conversation. Who are the kind of, you don't just make anybody your database administrator. These are highly privileged users of the system. Part of some of the soft things you want to do beyond the technical in restricting what they can and cannot do will be to conduct things like background checks, etc. Right? And then you have issues around misconfigurations. In fact, that is a big deal. In the course of our conversation, we'll see how certain misconfigurations can open the doors or the floodgates to attackers to make a mess of your system. Then you have issues around authentication, access control, right? That is your gateway. The principles of access controls remains the same, which are the principles of least privilege and the principles of need to have. The principles of least privilege and the principles of need to have. That also comes into play when you're dealing with databases. Only people who require access to the database should be granted access to the database. And even when you have access to the database, you should not have access to just everything. You should have access to resources that are required for your job role. And so as tech risk practitioners, this is a big deal and an area that we need to focus on and look at. Then there are issues around insecure architecture. So you have instances where people have both web server, application server, and the database on one box, which you typically call a single tier architecture. Now, it's not recommended. Most of the time, people do this either out of ignorance or because they're trying to manage a budget. The best practice, especially depending on your business requirement, will be to have a 2 or a 3-tiered architecture, where if you were to compromise the web server or you were to compromise the app server, your DB server, your database server is protected. It also gives you the leeway to decide on the kind of controls, right, you want to implement across each section. Don't forget that we had said earlier that defense in depth is the game here, where your security is layered, right? There are other threats like denial of service, you have SQL injection, you have issues around you not being able to have proper audit trails. Now, depending on the size of your institution and the size of the data, most big institutions don't have, try not to turn on audit logs on the database, especially databases like Oracle and the likes. Now, the worry there is that as that data grows, you begin to have performance issues on your database. And so some of the things institutions do to minimize that risk will be to have a third-party system that does the database activity monitoring. So you're monitoring accounts like the DBA to see what he or she is doing on the system. So when they are attempting to delete something, they send triggers to someone to take necessary action and stuff like that. Okay. So why audit a database? Give me a sec. I think we forgot to record this. Wow. Okay, so why audit a database? Auditing your database, besides ensuring operational efficiency, like I had mentioned earlier,